Welcome to the Pop Culture Lab, where we break down your favorite movies and music. This week, we're reviewing Andor. Cameron, let's get in the lab.
What up, what up?
Yeah.
We're back in the lab.
Back in the lab. We said that last time.
Well, when you come into the lab, you gotta welcome people.
That's true.
Roll out the red carpet.
You must return to the lab.
Indeed.
We didn't stay in the lab. We don't sleep in the lab.
Are we in the lab this time, or are we in like a droid facility or building the Death Star or something?
Ooh, yeah. Spoiler alert. We're building the Death Star,
yeah.
everybody. That's right, yeah. So
I'm excited for this one, in part because we have only reviewed movies so far, so we're finally reviewing a TV show.
That's true. We have mentioned or alluded to TV shows, but we have not dedicated an episode to a TV show.
It's about time,
If
you ask me.
Yeah.
And this is a good one to start with, because I love this show.
Yeah, which is glorious for me, because you rarely like Star Wars content. So
Exactly, yeah.
I was very happy.
Which I think speaks to the quality of the show, that it can win over somebody who's kind of a Star Wars skeptic.
Yes. It also speaks to your level of skepticism. You're a tough Star Wars fan to please.
Yeah, that's
Both
true.
things are true.
Yeah, you gotta stuff it full of British actors to get me.
Yes, right. Stiff. Is there stiff British acting and long drawn out writing? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
for Cameron.
is there actual effort put into a script and some good acting? Yeah, that's what I need.
Is it what a 12-year-old would call slow? Cameron's gonna love it.
That is true.
Yeah.
Touche.
Well, I mean that's not a diss, you know. The Mandalorian is meant for 12-year-olds, so.
Yeah. Putting a bunch of shit on the screen doesn't work. It's not enough for me. I like Star Wars. I can enjoy going to a Star Wars movie, but I do need there to be a little bit more character development, a little bit of effort put into the script and the acting.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this later, but a lot of Star Wars content relies on the buy-in of the love of these characters from the fans. You have to just nostalgia or love of relatively new characters, just a love of those characters with a lower bar for the show itself. Whereas this is taking on literally unknown, obscure characters, but with a really, really elevated
You're
show.
calling Mon Mothma an obscure Star Wars character?
Yeah, a little bit.
Of course, yeah.
Did you really catch her in the first trilogy?
I had no idea who that was before this show.
I mean, I remember her face in the original trilogy, but she wasn't like a character that stood out in any real way.
So they must have recast whoever, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Just somebody who looked like the person in the original trilogy.
Yeah,
Okay.
someone who's
I don't even
alive now.
remember that charter from the original trilogy at all.
She may even be dead. I'm not sure, but she really only shows up maybe in the first, second, but she's like she's just part of the rebels.
Yeah,
she's wearing white, really short haircut. Mon Mothma in Andor has her hair slicked back a lot. When she lets it down into those bangs, that's kind of her real OG look. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
we are indeed,
and
as usual.
I will compare Andor to The Mandalorian, and I will explain why I think that is both unfair at times and also inevitable. But speaking of The Mandalorian, I just wrapped up the last episode of the third season this week.
So it's done.
Well, it aired
This season.
today.
Yeah.
You didn't. You're not as quick on the Johnny on the spot as I am.
No, it lost me. This season kind of lost me. I was with you for the first half of this season, and then I just kind of stopped watching. There were other things that were taking my attention.
Yeah, I would just have enough investment in the show overall to have stuck with it, but this may be my last season. I'm not sure. We'll see.
It seems to be just petering out, I guess. It doesn't have the same... I don't know. I think it's getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And what I think you really liked of the first two seasons was that it was following Din Djarin, right? Mm-hmm. Din Djarin, and so it had this very... definitely a Western flair. Almost like following around a John Wayne character.
Yeah.
through the various worlds that Star Wars takes place in. Whereas now it feels like it's kind of bitten off a little bit more. It's more of an ensemble cast. You got the Bo-Katan stuff. You got this clan of Mandalorians who I think are Power Rangers. It just feels a little more spread out.
It is, not to mention the fact that crucial character development for Grogu and Din Djarin was done in another show.
Yeah.
One episode of another show, Boba Fett. So that's really sloppy storytelling to begin with. But I totally agree with you. And the other thing I would say is that the first 2 seasons really had a direction in terms of you really watched Din Djarin go from like a pretty cold bounty hunter to like really like his heart unfroze.
Yeah.
And for all the show's flaws, I do think, I mean, that's what pulled as many viewers in and kept them interested as it did, because it really, his character really grew into this father figure. But now they're kind of past that, and then Grogu's been trained by Luke, and he can fend for himself a bit better, so he's not as reliant on Din Djarin.
Not as vulnerable.
Yeah, and Din's kind of moving in other directions too and trying to figure out where he fits into the Mandalorians. So it's lost its focus, and then they've tried to do these other things, and yeah, it's going in a million directions. And the arc with Bo-Katan was pretty good, but it's just one thing in this pile of stuff this season. And not to mention, they're going in all these directions while also putting really weird kind of filler material in between. To me, like they will do some crucial season development, but it'll be really quick. It'll be like the second half of an episode, or even a shorter 30-minute episode, and then you'll have like 45-minute episode with Jack Black and Lizzo. Right.
Well, exactly. And before I kind of tuned out of this season, they had that one. It was like a 30-minute episode where one of the Mandalorian kids, the little acolytes, gets kidnapped by some pterodactyl type creature, and they just it was very much a filler episode. Like there was nothing really happening, nothing important anyway.
Well, and I can tell you now, having seen the whole season, I mean, none of those events amounted to anything.
Yeah.
They're spinning their wheels. The story that they crammed so much story in this last episode, I don't know why that wasn't more spread out. And I don't know why it has 8 episodes or whatever it has. I just don't know what's up with Disney Plus. When I watch Miss Marvel, I'm like 6, or Moon Knight's a better example. I watch Moon Knight and I'm like, 6 episodes is not enough.
Yeah.
You need more room to breathe. In this 8-episode Mandalorian season, I was like, you could have done this in 6. Give me the 6-episode format. You just wasted so much time just farting around.
Well, I mean, we'll get to this when we touch on some of the rumors going around, but Marvel seems to be, and Disney in general seems to be really reevaluating right now.
Yeah, on multiple fronts.
Not just what they're making, but how they're making it. And so I think the whole 6 to 8 episode format is probably being considered. How many shows they're trying to take on at once. There's a whole bunch more Star Wars shows coming out soon. There's the Ahsoka show. There's the Acolyte, which has Daphne Keane, who I've really been enjoying in his Dark Materials. So they have more on the way, and it seems to be getting kind of watered down. So hopefully they're taking note of some of the criticisms.
That's true. But I can't say that. I mean, for all the flaws that Disney Star Wars has, it doesn't seem to be suffering from the same. It's got a whole different set of symptoms than Marvel. It doesn't seem to suffer from the spread too thin thing yet.
It's not the same, but I do think you can tell it's being made by the same production studio. There are some similarities, I think.
Maybe in terms of writing and things like that, but visually...
And just the pace that they're coming out with stuff. Honestly, just on that level alone.
Well, sure. Yeah, that's true. But visually, there's a huge difference. They do not suffer from the Marvel VFX fatigue problem at all.
No,
at all.
That's true.
They do, and I know for a fact, like New Rockstars talks about this all the time. But they do all their VFX like in-house. Basically, It's part of Lucasfilms. It's like Skywalker Ranch, I think, and all that stuff. Basically, but they do their VFX, and so they're not outsourcing it the same way Marvel is, and they really aren't producing stuff still at that same rate. They, with all the announcements, they are moving more in that direction. But if you look at the last phase of Marvel compared to what's come out with Star Wars, it's still like half. Even with Obi-Wan and all that stuff, it's still way less. Because in the last year with that phase, I mean, think about all those TV shows and all those movies.
Yeah.
That's a lot of content. It's way more content. We're talking about like 0 Star Wars movies and like 3 shows. It's not the same. They haven't quite hit the same level. But you're right. They just announced a ton at Star Wars Con or whatever. And,
yeah,
there will be a lot.
That's fair. Well, so you've been watching The Mandalorian.
I've been watching that. What else have I watched this week? Anything good? Any movies? I don't know. Come back to me. What else have you watched?
Well, I watched the new Louis C.K. special.
Oh yeah, well I watched that too, actually.
Yeah, and it was pretty good. You know, I thought my biggest concern with somebody like Louis C.K., who obviously had some public, a PR crisis on his hands over the last couple of years. He did some things that are not good, that, you can probably debate about whether or not he should have been permanently removed from the public face, but he certainly had some consequences for his career, and he kind of disappeared from the spotlight for the last 3 or 4 years. And he's been making a comeback recently. And so this was was it his first special since it came back?
He might have done a little bit of stuff. Or he might have had one special prior. I think one of our friends actually watched it, but this seems bigger. It was a wider release or something, and it was filmed at the Dolby. That's a big theater.
Yeah. And I guess my biggest concern is that he would spend a lot of energy kind of railing against the criticism that he's received for his own actions. I mean, he is the author of his downfall. And so I was a little worried that he would kind of take a page out of Dave Chappelle's book, who has very much gotten into the habit of just complaining about, his treatment from the transgender community and just like kind of punching down, which has been super disappointing. And not only has it been disappointing, it's just not been that funny to me. I just haven't really I haven't thought he had that same flair that he had when he was coming up as a comedian, where he felt like a relatable person, which I think is really crucial when you're a comedian. Like, you have to be able to relate to your audience. And increasingly, Dave Chappelle has not felt relatable to me. I was encouraged that Louis' special still very much felt like Louis. It was pretty funny. There were some things that really made me laugh out loud. I don't think it was maybe quite the high watermark that he had earlier in his career, but I thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it was funny, and I definitely know what you're saying about Dave Chappelle, and I just saw him live recently,
yeah.
And to me, definitely the biggest downfall in all of that is this shit, it's just not funny.
Exactly.
And it's repetitive.
Yeah.
If it was funny the first 2 times, we're going on like 6.
Just beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, every special, every tour, everything, and I saw him with Chris Rock, and Chris Rock was basically previewing the material he just came out with, all related to, Will Smith and all that stuff, and it just sounded like a complaint fest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Chris Rock's material is way different. It's pretty funny, and I'm not knocking him for like talking about what we all knew he was going to talk about. I can't hold that against him.
Right.
It was like the most public thing ever. How can you not address it? But between that and then Chappelle comes out and does, and Chris Rock's set was way funnier, but then Chappelle came out and did the set that was just kind of whatever, and and he's kind of gone that direction, I guess, for a while. I saw him probably 5 or 6 years ago at the Neptune. Clayton got us tickets, and he was definitely more like a storyteller and wasn't always just cracking really, really sharp jokes. He was kind of just being himself and talking shit and telling this and
right.
that. But he wasn't harping on just this one issue over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And he was telling stories about being behind the scenes at the Oscars, actually the ones that Chris Rock hosted, ironically, and telling stories about going to Leonardo DiCaprio's house. And so while it wasn't still the same format of comedy, it was really interesting to listen to and rich and cool. And even though he didn't feel like a relatable person, he felt like a celebrity. He's going to freaking Leonardo DiCaprio's house, but he told it in a relatable way. And that's a key difference in comedy.
Definitely.
I'm not saying Bill Maher is the best comedian ever, and I know I like him more than you do, but he acknowledges his like wealth and celebrity status in a very real way all the time. And I think that's important. If your goal is authenticity, which it should be as a comedian in a lot of ways, you can be rich and acknowledge that you're a big famous celebrity while also being like real about it.
Yeah. It's the self-awareness piece.
Exactly.
And it gets you so far. I mean, you and I have very little in common with any of these people who have lots and lots of wealth and power and privilege and are brushing elbows with these other huge celebrities. But sometimes you can tell when someone has a little bit of self-awareness, and more than anything, if you're a comedian, some self-deprecation. I mean, being able to take a joke at your own expense. I mean, you're a freaking comedian. Like, you have to be able to do that. And
there's nothing worse than a comedian who can dish it out but can't take it.
Yeah. And I never thought that I would see Dave Chappelle of all people doing that, but he just seems unable to take a joke at his own expense. He seems like he's so out of bounds.
Yeah.
Which is too bad. But enough of that, because Louis, I feel like he did have self-awareness. Like I that's coming through. He's always known he was a creep. I mean, half of his jokes, even when he was coming up, were about how he was a creep.
They're real weird.
Yeah. And
they came from a strange psyche.
Yeah. And so in hindsight, maybe some of those jokes were a little, they hit a little too close on the nose, but at least he seems to be a little more self-aware in the aftermath of his big public fallout.
Definitely. You can't relate to huge celebrities. People don't stop you on the street and say, "Hey, are you the host of the Pop Culture Lab podcast?"
All the time.
Dude, I can't get the ladies off me. Oh my God, is that Connor from Pop Culture Lab? Just kidding. I can say that because my fiance doesn't listen to this. The joys.
Let's get into Connor's Comic Corner.
Connor's Comic Corner. The rumor mill.
Absolutely. There's a lot to cover this week.
Title TBD.
There has been so much in the news lately on the Marvel front, on the DC front. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I am not necessarily focused on only comic book things here, but I am still myself. So most of this is geared towards that. But some of it I actually just showed you, so you got a little sneak preview, and we'll discuss some other things too. And some of these are not rumors, I guess.
Yeah, we got some trailers too.
Point out. Yeah, some are just observations, some are facts, but it's just what's going on in the world.
Let's get into it.
So, first thing on my list is Superman Legacy enters pre-production.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the biggest thing ever, but we knew this was coming. We knew he was working on a script, he being James Gunn. He announced he's going to be also directing the movie. Such a surprise. He never directs the movies that he writes as well.
Yeah. The funny part to me was that somebody leaked that news and I guess broke an NDA. And so that was all over the news because they didn't want to they hadn't made the announcement he was going to direct it yet. But it was like common knowledge. I mean, everybody seemed to know that was going to be the case, right?
Or is heavily assumed.
Yeah.
And what's the harm in telling people?
Yeah, I don't know.
He's writing it, but maybe they'll get a different director. Like,
I don't know.
Stop wasting our time. We know who. Just tell us.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, part of the fun of keeping it in the news cycle, being able to every couple of weeks or months release some little tidbit like that.
I guess that's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably calculated. You're right.
DC needs that kind of hype right now.
Yeah, they do. Well, anyway, that's good news. It's moving along. I heard things like costuming has started and some very preliminary bits and pieces.
The big news will be when they announce who is going to play Superman.
Yeah, they're going to have to go through the whole casting process. I doubt it's even really heavily underway, and they probably will. I don't even know if we'll get an announcement.
I mean, if they're trying to release this in 2025, which I believe is the tentative release date, their time's a ticking.
Yeah, but they could
can't
still
linger too long.
No, but they could still avoid announcing it this calendar year, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
They could close out 2023 and we could still not have answers to that.
Probably true.
What's next? The Russos. They've been doing a lot of interviews lately. They actually also interviewed Zack Snyder on their podcast, the Pizza Film School.
Oh, did they?
Called. Yeah. I mean, you don't care. SnyderCon's coming up. There was
SnyderCon. There's a SnyderCon.
There's a SnyderCon.
Wow.
And he re-released his DC trilogy, but it was part of his like suicide awareness thing, against suicide prevention thing. So it actually you had to pay like $150 per ticket to each of these movies to go see them. So it's really to raise money for charity.
Yeah.
But so yeah, all that's going on. But they were just talking to him to reflect on his time at DC, and it's a lot of stuff we already know, like the studio notes that were given to him after Batman v Superman, trying to add, there's not a lot more jokes and levity in Zack Snyder's Justice League, but they're there if you compare them to Batman v Superman. I mean, you can see where the studio like steered him in a slightly different direction and where he worked on it. But the Russos, the big thing is that they were expressing interest in directing The Brave and the Bold.
They did, but then later they came out with kind of a retraction, or they said that we just had to think of something on the spot, and Batman was the first thing that came out.
Well, because I think people really ran away with it.
Yeah.
And they also said something like, we know James Gunn and we love him so much, blah, blah, blah. The relationship's already there. So I think some people took that as like, have they been in talks? And is this really a thing? And you just can't trust anything now after this whole debacle with Ben Affleck. You know about that whole thing.
I mean, it's been every step of the way. It has felt like there's a news item and then they go in another direction, and then there's mixed messages. And
we can separate, leadership at DC as well.
I'm a little concerned, though, because that at least has not changed a lot, even in the James Gunn era. He has been at least directly answering questions. He's been super available to fans, but there's still been a lot of noise coming out of the DC side.
True, but I would say, like, if you're talking about the Rock, Zachary Levi stuff in particular, that really does tie back to well before when James Gunn was there. To me, the biggest foible that he has had, personally, has been when he was talking, he was like, Ben Affleck is really interested in directing one of our projects. We just have to find out what that is. And then there was an interview with Ben Affleck, and they asked him, like, you've been in talks to direct something for DC? He's like, no, absolutely not. He's like, I do not want any part of what they're doing. Like, kudos to them, but not interested.
Sure.
So it made James Gunn seem really stupid. And they must have had some conversation or something. I doubt that he would just put that out there for nothing. No, seriously. I mean, why would you do that? You're the head of a company.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, that's been just a constant in the whole DC saga. And I was hoping that when James Gunn came on board, that we would start to see a change, in a little bit of a tightening of the ship. And I haven't seen that yet, which is not to say that it won't get better, but right now it still feels very uneven, and
it's definitely a communication problem. You have to have messaging.
Problems.
You have to have messaging, everyone on board with the same messaging if you're going to put that stuff out there. And it also actually is a negative to James Gunn's like interaction on Twitter. I mean, he's so active on there that he kind of dug himself in a hole that way. If he had just said nothing and no one knew anything about what was going on behind the scenes, he wouldn't have been caught in that trap. It's because he was trying to be overly, like, what's the
available word?
transparent.
Yeah.
Of course, is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, he was just trying to be sort of overly transparent with the process, and it just ended up making him look stupid.
Well, and that's my problem is that, there are always going to be fans who are going to be sharing rumors and theorizing and all that.
And stars, too. They run their mouths.
And that's fine, but when you have officials in the DC world coming out with things and announcements that are then taken back, which was absolutely a part of DC before James Gunn joined, I'm a little concerned that I'm still seeing a lot of that with this Russo brothers news, with the Zachary Levi stuff, with what you're talking about now. I feel like there have been enough examples since he came on that I'm still concerned.
Yeah, you make some good points. And now Marvel's getting a dose of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're getting messy, too.
Speaking of that studio, my next bit of news is the Marvels trailer came out. Looks cool to both of us. I think the big news on this trailer is that it is the most disliked. Have you seen this?
Trailer.
Marvel trailer on YouTube.
I'm not surprised. Well,
but everyone's like chalking it up to the trolls.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, same
For
here.
whatever reason, people seem to really hate Brie Larson.
It seems to have to do with Brie Larson.
Yeah.
Because even if you look at the YouTube comments and stuff, everyone likes Kamala Khan quite a bit, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Like she's a very charming actress.
It seems more like politically motivated or whatever you want to call it. I don't even know.
She's the embodiment of all their feminist rage.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I thought it looked like a fun trailer. I'm really I think the concept is really fun, how whenever one of them uses their powers, they switch places with each other. Mm-hmm. I think that's it makes for a lot of interesting situational comedy, I think, that's going to come up. They already hinted at that, when Kamala Khan uses her powers and then she switches to wherever Miss Marvel was in space, like in the middle of a fight and stuff. So I think it's going to be fun.
Not Miss Marvel, you mean Photon?
No, I
Kamala
didn't
Khan
Miss
is
Marvel.
Miss Marvel.
I meant Captain Marvel.
No, she switches places with
Captain Marvel.
No,
I thought so. Yeah.
Well, sorry, what are you talking about? In her bedroom in that post-credit scene? I thought you were talking about the opening scene in space with Nick Fury of the trailer.
I'm talking about in the middle of this trailer. Kamala Khan says like, "Oh yeah, I have cool powers," like, and she's gonna show them off, and then they're saying, "No, don't," and then she uses her powers and then switches to wherever Captain Marvel was at that time.
Yeah, and Brie Larson shows up. Yeah, definitely.
I just think it's a fun concept. I think it'll make it a fun movie. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, me too. The other thing I think we've maybe touched on in a recent episode was the Blue Beetle trailer. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal. It has like 20 million views. It's obviously looking pretty popular. It's supposedly set in the new DCU, so there's that. Could be a promising start there.
It looks fun. I'm totally unfamiliar with that character, other than what you've told me about him. And it looks like an interesting origin story. I mean, there have been so many comic book origin stories told, it's kind of hard to stand out. But this one looks a little different and interesting.
It does, yeah.
I don't know. What stood out to you from the trailer?
I don't think we've had many Hispanic superheroes, so it is a first there, and it does have a different flavor for that reason. I think his tech and the scarab is an alien thing, so his whole tech, his suit, the way it looks and the way he manifests his powers is incredibly comic book accurate, so that looks really cool. It looks like they took the best parts of Iron Man and like the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern, just kind of combined all these other things that have been done in superhero costumes, and it's clearly very CGI heavy,
right? But
it looks good, and I thought the Batman is a fascist line was a good one.
Yeah, your boy is taking some slings and arrows.
Yeah, but it's a clever way to like reference the rest of the DCU and make it funny and also maybe kind of relatable. And yeah, I don't know. It also gives you a perspective on his family and his community and where, they're at, because Batman is, this guy who fights for the people, but he is working with this Justice League, and he really is like at this big high level. I could see someone who feels left behind and forgotten about being like, well, he doesn't take care of me, this guy. And that could be something really interesting to explore. Like that could be a potentially really loaded and layered comment, or just a throwaway
both
joke.
Batman and Bruce Wayne have very different connotations. I think there's some fertile ground to explore in that in our current kind of political climate around economic inequality and around vigilante justice and all the things that are kind of on the tips of people's tongues in our real world that we live in. There's a lot to explore in the Batman character that I have been kind of surprised they haven't done more of that, honestly.
It was certainly touched on in The Batman, though.
Yeah, it touched on, but I think there's a lot to explore there.
There's a lot to explore. It could be like the focus, but it was fairly mined in the Batman with the Riddler's whole thing was against the elite, And remember, he has that scene when he's in the jail cell with Batman, and he's literally saying, we almost got him.
Bruce Wayne.
It's so great. Yeah. It's so great. And he's literally delivering his like scathing review of Bruce Wayne as this horrible elite who could never have known the suffering in an orphanage that he knew because exactly of all the things that we're saying. He just has this cushioned existence and sits in his ivory tower. Mm-hmm. So he was laying all that on, to Batman, thinking that Batman is someone who's like him, which is a dichotomy of the character in general.
Yeah.
He is simultaneously this wealthy, privileged billionaire, and he gets his hands dirty. I mean, both things are true. Mm-hmm. So let's not linger on this topic. You'll never shut me up. We did talk about Jonathan Majors. Should we explore the recast possibility?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in our last episode we said, oh, well, there's probably not going to be a lot more to talk about this for a while until there's another news item. Well, there's another news item, which is that he was dropped by his management and his agent, which would be a strong indication.
And now at least 2 film roles, I think.
Yeah, and all combined, that is a strong indication that whatever assault charges he's going to be are going to be leveled against him are likely to stick, because I mean the man was looking at a very successful acting career ahead of him, and so agents and management are unlikely to drop somebody that lucrative unless they really think it's going down.
Yeah. And didn't you say something about other accusers even?
Yeah, that was actually just dropped today that some other abuse victims are willing to come forward and cooperate with the DA. So yeah, it's escalating.
Yeah. Probably not going to end well for him. But
no.
But if it is what it looks like, then that's the way it should go.
Yeah. I mean, it's an awful story. It's really it's terrible for the victims first and foremost, and it's sad to see somebody kind of throw their life away like this. And I mean, he had every possible reason to stay on the straight and narrow. He was looking at being one of the cogs of probably the most lucrative movie franchise on the planet. And here he goes. So
he was standing on the Oscar stage like not 3 weeks before.
On the cover of Men's Health magazine, he was the apple of the Hollywood eye for a moment there, and it seemed like his star was only rising. And he threw it away, which is sad. So
crazy.
And yeah, I mean, what an interesting conundrum for Marvel. They have 2 Avengers movies, one with named Kang Dynasty, which is the character he played, and he was going to be the big bad for the next 3 years. So it puts Marvel in a really interesting place. I assume they're going to recast for Kang, but continue with the story as they had planned. But who knows?
I think, don't they have to? They put all this money into like visualization, and they're probably writing early iterations of scripts, and They probably need to keep that train moving, which is unfortunate because I almost thought to myself, after Quantumania and everything, you could just
pivot.
You could just call it a wash. You could be like, oh, we don't know where that guy is. He got sucked into the vortex, and we found a different bad guy.
Kang Dynasty is one big just.
Well, you could truly pivot and just
out.
quietly. You could kind of explain away the Council of Kangs. And be like, I don't know, they're not really that bad. And I thought about that, but they probably won't.
It seems unlikely. And the good news is that Kang, his whole thing is having all these variations of him all across the multiverse, and so
exactly
you can very easily explain away why a new Kang would look different.
Yes. It's interesting because all the versions of Kang have looked like Jonathan Majors, whereas like all the versions of Loki weren't necessarily him.
Right.
Case in point, Sylvie.
Yeah.
And Spider-Man. You had Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. They don't look like Tom Holland.
Right. Of course, the one who they have.
Whose face is always the same.
It's kind of funny.
Also because he's the master of the multiverse, so it's kind of like... It did make sense that he would always have basically the same face, except for that blue guy in the crowd and in the Council of Kangs.
Yeah.
That was a pretty stupid tag scene, I'm not going to lie. Anyway, let's not get back into that, but they could recast. I
think they probably will. It makes me wonder what they're going to do with Loki, if they're just going to just ship that next season as if nothing happened or what. Because it's already been filmed. So...
I know. Do they reshoot that with a new...
I don't know.
Probably not.
What a mess.
But how much, crap shit can you get in for releasing something for a guy who's, like, convicted of abuse?
Yeah.
What's worse? To release... Like, even if you know that they're going to recast him, to still put that out? Does that... But then again, Warner Brothers is putting out The Flash...
Yeah.
And they've waited for that bad press to die down, which it has for the most part, although still the public consciousness doesn't forget. But Ezra did do some fucking weird things.
Yeah.
Pardon my French. And so the fact that they're just going for it with the movie, and it's the same problem. It's like already shot and made and everything. So they might just put out Loki and just bite their lip about it,
Guess we'll see.
We will.
Won't have to wait long.
Oh, there's a rumor that Reed Richards might be cast soon.
I saw that, and I
you?
even saw a rumor of who they might cast for it. Did you see this?
That's what I'm getting at.
Oh.
What did you see?
Adam Driver?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, I don't know. I'm not a huge Adam Driver fan, I gotta admit.
Oh, boo.
No.
He's so handsome.
Ew.
Dude, he is. Girls love that guy.
Really?
Oh my god, totally. It's his voice and his whole
not my
demeanor.
type.
He's jacked too.
Yeah, I part of me wonders how much of my opinion of Adam Driver is from the TV show Girls, which is what he kind of got his start in. And he plays this just despicable guy in that show. And I part of me thinks that subconsciously I'm still kind of associating Adam Driver with that character that I hated.
He's a really good actor.
He is a good actor. I liked him in Marriage Story. I did think it was a little overrated. I didn't quite get the hype for it.
He's very good, though.
I wasn't a huge fan of the Star Wars movies that he was in, but hard to say how much of that was him and how much of that was just the movies. So I don't know. I guess I don't. I'm kind of left out of the Adam Driver hype.
Black Klansman or anything?
I did not. No. I heard it was great.
It is good. Yeah, he's good in that.
Yeah.
Kind of outshines the lead even.
He doesn't seem like a Reed Richards to me. I don't know. I'm surprised they're not going with John Krasinski because it seemed like people really liked him in.
Well, this is just a rumor.
Multiverse of Madness.
This could be a bunch of BS.
Yeah, it could be.
We don't know.
Could be.
It probably is.
The other one that has gotten some attention, there's like a little bit of a fan movement around getting Glenn Howerton from Always Sunny in Philadelphia as Reed Richards. I think he'd be a great Reed Richards.
Yeah, not a fan of that at all.
Well, of course.
Well,
that's just because you don't like the show, though.
But I don't hate the show. Like, I've enjoyed episodes of it. It's not hugely my cup of tea, but I don't sit around hating on it.
Don't you think he would be a great Reed Richards, though?
No, dude. He's not that guy.
Oh, my God.
No. Enough with the jokey Marvel stuff.
He wouldn't even have to be jokey. He's,
Ian Gruffudd was a better choice in the old
Who?
Fantastic Four movies.
No.
Doesn't Miles Teller play him in the most recent adaptation that was supposedly no good? That's a better choice to me than Glenn Howerton. Glenn Powell, the idiot from the Top Gun movie and then Devotion with Jonathan Majors. Choose that guy over Glenn Howerton. Glenn Howerton is this smirky, jokey a-hole. He'd be a better Iron Man than he would be Reed Richards. They're not the same person. Krasinski's like kind of over seriousness that he applies to his cameo and like what he does in the Quiet Place movies. That's closer to me.
Yeah, I guess so.
He's a pretty serious guy. He's like a big walking brain. Glenn Howerton is too jokey. You know, he's gonna be like, "Hey, I'm Reed Richards." Yeah, me and Sue Storm just boned in the back. Like that's the vibe I get. I'm like, no, definitely not.
Huh.
But
I guess we'll find out.
I haven't seen him do anything serious. Or I did see him appear in something once, and it was like...
You weren't impressed?
Jarringly unmemorable.
Huh.
Yeah. No, I don't see them pulling that off. I don't see him carrying that. And not to mention that, he also has to be the leader of the team, the Fantastic Four. He's got to be giving Johnny Storm crap and...
Yeah.
You know.
It's hard for me to make any comparisons because you don't really like... It's Always Sunny, and like he's kind of the leader of that gang, but obviously it's a very different vibe. It would be a very different tone.
Yeah, I don't see the translation. Maybe he could surprise me.
Yeah.
You know, Heath Ledger surprised us all, so I'm open. But that would not. That if I were a casting agent, that wouldn't make sense to me. But I can see where Adam Driver's weird too. I hear you there.
Yeah, I think you need somebody who's a little more charismatic than Adam Driver is.
Oh, I think he's
it's hard
incredibly
for me to imagine him as a leader.
I think he's very charismatic. People keep thinking he should be Doctor Doom instead.
I would see now that checks out for me. I could see that a lot better.
Me too, but it's very Kylo Ren. It's a little on the nose. Yeah. It's like, oh, let's put him in a suit and make him a bad guy.
Yeah.
And, wait, sure. I've seen this movie before.
Have him hover and glower.
Yeah. Little too on the nose, which isn't even his fault. He's just already done that.
Getting typecast.
Yeah. People also say Giancarlo Esposito, and I'm like, again.
Yeah.
And you didn't see the end of Mandalorian Season 3. He's in Mandalorian armor, head to toe.
Oh, God.
A black Mandalorian armor. He looks like Mandalorian Darth Vader. He looks like Space Batman. And so... Yeah, like you can't put the same actor in black metal villain armor twice.
This has been my complaint that we have talked about, is that they just keep on recasting these same handful of actors in these similar roles across all of these different franchises that are just spitting out tendrils like nobody's business.
Sure. Well, we'll save this for another day. That's a debate we could do a whole podcast.
Exactly, we could do a whole episode on that.
On just that. Did you see we should move on soon, but did you see the Godzilla Kong teaser?
No.
You should go check that out. They did Godzilla versus Kong, but this is like a whole next edition.
It's amazing. I mean, really, they're going back to the well on all of these historic franchises. I mean,
Insidious 5 will be coming out.
Dracula, King Kong.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me. And the last one I wanted to mention was a new trailer called The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Yeah.
Which is about the ship that Dracula took from Transylvania to get to... I guess he's going to England in the book.
Huh.
Yeah. So it's how he journeys to England to mess with Mina Harker and John... all those people. Van Helsing, the whole crew. I think in the story, Renfield is on the boat with him. Anyway... Interesting time for that movie to come out in the same year as Renfield. There hasn't really been much Dracula or vampire content in a minute. And now it's 2023. 2023 seems to be the year of the vampire. So, cool. But I do think Universal's been making moves to kind of bring back its monsters, and that sort of stuff is trending right now. There's like a Russell Crowe exorcism movie that's coming out right now. The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss was a take on a monster movie.
That was a great movie.
It was really good. So, and they tried with like Tom Cruise, The Mummy, but that didn't go anywhere.
You're right. There is a bit of a monster phase that seems to be
kaiju could be included in that.
But it's not just monsters. I feel like it's franchises. It is just like the age of the big franchise.
Yeah, but how long can we keep saying that? We've been saying that since 2014, 15.
Yeah, I think the difference now would be the streaming element, where there's so many different places where you could develop a concept of whatever. And so it's one thing to make a huge AAA movie with a multi-$100 million budget versus, spitting out a quick TV show for a fraction of that budget, and then maybe getting subscribers to your streaming service or whatever.
Well, yeah. Definitely these franchises are doubling down on shows, and even the Batman. Oh, the Penguin. I don't even think you saw the Penguin teaser, but there's a little... It's still in production, so it's not like a fully blown teaser, but it's a teaser for the Penguin, which is for all intents and purposes like the Batman 1.5. So... it's going to bridge the gap between this, the first movie and the sequel.
All these spin-offs. There's so many spin-offs.
Yeah, so I hear you there. It's like the era of spin-offs and franchise output just going through the roof.
Right. Last week we talked about John Wick 4 and the spin-offs that they're probably going to make out of that with Donnie Yen and with the ballerina Ana de Armas.
And there's already a show called The Continental coming to Peacock.
Exactly. It's just spin-offs galore.
Yeah. But I would say the cinema landscape in terms of franchise and remakes looks roughly the same.
Similar. Sure.
I think.
That's fair.
It's not like, oh my God, we're seeing all these remakes. It's like, okay, well, it's like we're going on like a decade now of this, so.
Yeah.
Stop being surprised. Not you, just people. Shut up, Cameron.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm done. That was only my very long detour. Andor.
Let's do it.
Andor.
Well, where to start here? It stars Diego Luna as Cassian Andor.
Yep.
He's also in Rogue One, which was a Star Wars solo movie, not Han Solo, but a standalone Star Wars movie.
It's called A Star Wars Story.
Okay. And that came out. Oh man, we should have looked this up in our research. It was like 2017, something like that. Sounds about right.
That's a good guess. Maybe 16.
And it was good. I really liked that movie.
He plays the same character from that. Yeah, it's
same
really
character.
Good.
So this is a kind of a prequel to Rogue One, showing.
And Rogue One is a kind of a prequel to
the original trilogy,
the original movie. Yeah.
And Andor covers the development of Diego Luna's character from kind of a thief, a low-level criminal and smuggler to a hero of the rebellion that eventually is going to really contribute to the overall success of this alliance that overtakes the Empire.
Yes, in a broad sense, yeah. To get a little more nitty-gritty, he rises up in the rebellion, and in the events of Rogue One, he is partially responsible for basically getting the Death Star plans into the hands of Princess Leia, which is like the first thing that Darth Vader is looking for right off the bat in the very first Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
And she hides them with R2-D2 and sends him off to Luke. Right. And that's how the whole thing gets going. So yeah, what he does is, and then what Leia gives to Luke allows him to fly his X-Wing down that narrow path and shoot that little thing in the Death Star that makes it go boom. So, yes, Cassian Andor's little actions have big consequences.
Yeah, and so this being, and I think this is an important place to kind of start. When you do a prequel of anything, the danger is that you know how it ends. And so you have to...
what are the stakes?
What are the stakes? You have to give the audience a reason to care about the events of the show because they already know that Cassian Andor is going to survive the events of this show in order to get to Rogue One. And so I think that's kind of an important place to start with covering this show is how was it successful or not in doing that?
And some prequels try to play the game of like
fake out or something.
Yeah, like faking out like a character, like the main character's gonna die, even though you just know they're not. And because human beings are human, we get still somewhat wrapped up in the emotion of that scene, but you just know that it's meaningless. So, but Andor doesn't mess around with any of that. They don't play around. Like the best way I can sum up this show, and I was thinking about it as The Mandalorian wrapped up. And because The Mandalorian, and this isn't necessarily a criticism of it because it is what it is and they're selling toys and everything, but it is more geared towards kids.
Yeah.
And so you have to hold it to a slightly different standard. Andor is made
for
adults, like very clearly. No, not to sell zero toys. I mean, that is not their goal. And so it treats its audience with a level of respect. And that's what I'm getting at by saying they don't bother with fake outs and things like that because they are treating their audience with a much more maturity and respect than The Mandalorian is.
You're telling me that kids aren't going to want to buy a Dedra Meero Imperial Security Bureau action figure?
Dude, I know the Security Bureau is pretty sexy, but... No. Yeah, even the droid isn't cute enough to be a toy.
Oh, I thought he was adorable, actually.
He is, but he's for adults. Yes, but his personality, the way he's written, the fact that his power issues give him that stutter.
Yeah.
That's something that's written for an adult, not a child. BB-8 doesn't even have that level of sophistication. Like a character trait or a quirk that's even that interesting. BB-8 is a walking toy commercial. He just spins around. He's cute. He goes. It's just like someone was like, "Hey, R2-D2's cute. Can you just dial that to 11 and shove it down people's throats?"
I think you're making an excellent point right now. I think this is a perfect indicator of what this show is trying to do and why it worked for me in a way that most Star Wars content doesn't. Because knowing, just like we were talking about, knowing how this ends, instead of trying to do the fake outs or mess around with the plot matters in this, and there's actually a lot that happens in the course of this season, and we'll talk about that. But instead, what it really is a character study.
Yeah.
They're trying to show you, and not tell you, show you what drives an Imperial Security Bureau officer to be the way they are and to do that. Like, what are the dynamics at play that could turn somebody like Syril Karn into, an operative of the Empire, of this restrictive Empire? Like, what actually makes him tick? In contrast, what about the rebels? They're not all perfect. They all have lots of skeletons in their closet too. What differentiates them from the Empire? And sometimes that's not all clear at all. So I found myself in this show, I don't know if I would say rooting for, but maybe even rooting for Dedra Meero. She was one of my favorite characters, and I found her extremely compelling. I didn't necessarily want the Empire to win, but I did empathize strongly with her character and with some of these other Imperials.
Her in particular, I think, in a lot of ways, because you identify with her ambition.
Yeah.
Syril Karn is obviously ambitious as well, but he sort of strikes me more as just like a real sycophant of fascism.
Yeah.
Like, to make fascism work, you just have to have those people that just love it. They just eat it up, and they want to control, and they, they just crave that power, and the whole structure of fascism just speaks to their being.
Yeah.
And that's what he is. And I don't know if she is as aligned with fascism itself.
Right.
However, it's mostly just, she just comes across as incredibly ambitious and intelligent.
And competent.
Right, and competent. She's the only person who can figure out that this relatively small number of spread out incidents are actually related.
A pattern,
and
right?
No one else, everyone's dismissive to that.
Well, and that's another thing that differentiates this from other Star Wars content is that Imperials, it's become a joke it's become like a meme over the course of the last 40 years that they can't hit the broadside of a barn with their blasters, right? They miss everything. They are kind of by definition, they're incompetent. And so it was such a breath of fresh air to feel like these Imperials were not just tomato cans for the rebellion to knock over. They actually had some real teeth going on.
Yes, well, and they're never explored as characters. They're just Nazi stand-ins.
Archetypes, yeah.
They're just the Nazis,
yeah.
These
are people. All of the characters, to varying degrees of success in terms of their acting, I would argue, they are authentic, real, lived-in characters, whether good or bad, or a combination of both, mostly.
It's really not about good or bad, but to make a compelling show, you just have to make the character have depth and more to them. If you create a fully rounded character that springs to life because it's a person and not just this flat thing, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. I mean, case in point, Breaking Bad. I never really watched that show, but the conventional Hollywood wisdom was you cannot have a show with that level of success with a fundamentally sort of unlikable or a character that does terrible, terrible things. Sopranos kind of opened that door. Mm-hmm. And like if Sopranos is the beginning of that where, well, maybe you can be compelled endlessly by someone who's at the end of the day not at all a good person.
Right.
But you can see so many sides of them and you understand them at such a level. Human beings in our nature, we just seek to understand. So even if you do monstrous things, if you can somehow find a route where if a person can go, oh, that was a monstrous thing they did, but I do somehow a little bit see where they were coming from.
Right.
That's enough. That's all you need to compel someone to just be along with that character.
They have real motivations, not just I'm gonna be evil or like I'm gonna be good. They have, and even Cassian, I mean, he spends, I would say, I think this is kind of a good place to maybe do a bit more of a broad view of what this season looks like and how it's formed. I think there are like 4 stages of this season of Andor. It starts with Cassian Andor trying to find his sister. That's his first objective in the first couple episodes. And then it sets up his he gets recruited by Luthen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, to be a part of this rebel mission on the planet Aldhani, to steal the Imperial payroll to pay for this rebel alliance. Basically, they're spending the whole season trying to figure out how they're going to afford to keep this rebellion going. And then the third section of this season is when he gets imprisoned on the planet Narkina 5, which is like a prison planet, essentially.
Yeah, and just quickly to touch on how the rebellion is financed. Mon Mothma is in the background of this as a senator is financing the rebellion and struggling with that, and she's also just dealing with her own personal and political issues. So that's happening in the background as well. But continue.
Yeah, that plus the ISB subplot continues through the whole duration of the season. These are mostly kind of the Cassian centered things that I'm talking about how I'm categorizing it here.
I guess I lumped it in timing wise because they do kind of start after the first 3 episodes. I just rewatched about the first half, so most of that kickstarts after the 3rd episode.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the final section of the season is where it comes to a head, where there's really a confrontation between not even the rebels, I wouldn't say, just the locals of Ferrix, which is the planet where Cassian starts on.
Dank Ferric.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, what?
a little too close,
Dank
maybe
Ferrix.
in the writing room. But the conflict between the villagers of Ferrix and the Imperials, and that's the climax of the season.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean it's a good way. It's like you said, there's some overlap. There's some subplots that are continuing throughout. There's the whole Syril Karn subplot going on as well. But in terms of Cassian, it is really his progression and his radicalization, really, from all in it for himself, just trying to kind of save his own hide. Other than he's looking for a sister, they established that immediately. But he kind of blows off these rebel attempts to recruit him, certainly from Stellan Skarsgård, initially basically saying, like, you guys are crazy, like trying to take on the Empire. I'm not in it for that. And by the end, clearly he's come around.
Yeah. I think the kernel of it is a character who's learning to care about something bigger than himself.
Yeah.
After and they show you why he really has no reason to do so. He was living on a planet that was decimated by like poison, toxic mining and
by the Empire
from the Empire, and then he was taken. I mean, even though his maternal figure is
Marva,
he loves her very much, but he was taken against his will. I mean, he just hasn't had a choice in any of this, and so his goal when we meet him is to just sell this piece of tech that he has that's worth a lot of money and just get out of there. Basically, He just wants to get away. And
and even when he joins this little rebel cell on Aldhani,
it's just for the money.
They pay him. Exactly. Yeah. He's a mercenary.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's learning. Yeah, he's learning to have a higher calling, interested in something beyond money and something that means way more than he could ever mean on his own.
Mm-hmm. And what those reasons are for taking on the Empire is different for each of the characters. I think that is where a lot of the characterization in the show comes in. Because it's different for Mon Mothma than it is for Stellan Skarsgård's character, Luthen, than it is for Cassian Andor, than it is for Marva. Everybody kind of has their own reasons. And that is what makes the complexity and the contours of these characters.
Yeah, definitely. The rebel who tries to betray the group, the guy who's also on the bear.
Yeah.
What's his last name? Scheme,
I think.
Scheme.
I have this down here in a second.
I think it's a very pivotal moment for Cassian.
Arvel Skeen.
Arvel. Nice. That's what I'm going to name my firstborn, Arvel, after that guy. The moment when Cassian confronts him, or when he basically admits to Cassian that he was going to betray everyone and he was just doing it for the money and he was going to run away and steal it, and then kind of asks Cassian to come with him. I think that is the first really pivotal moment of growth for his character is when he decides to go with the Stellan Skarsgård character. But the second real major development is that moment, because that character is kind of a reflection of Cassian in a way. He is literally doing kind of the same thing that Cassian would have done.
Yeah.
And I think Cassian's even tempted by the offer to split the money with him, although he also realizes you couldn't trust someone who you already isn't trustworthy to begin with. He's stabbing them in the back. What makes you think he's not going to do the same to you? So he's too savvy to fall for that, but that character really reflects him, and he decides to, make a different choice.
There are a couple betrayals in this show. There's that one, although it's not really betraying Andor, it's more betraying Vel and this rebel outfit. But then later, Tim, with 2 M's.
Tim. Some call me Tim.
Exactly. Who is Bix Colleen's boyfriend on their home planet. This is
earlier, not later.
No, it is later. It's near the end of the season, right?
What?
Where Tim turns him into the Empire and gets killed.
It's like episode 4. I just watched it.
Oh,
yeah. That happens before he goes to Aldhani.
Okay.
That's why he's like out of there. There's a big showdown with Syril Karn and all the
right.
We've got to get out of here.
I love that Scottish
guy. Yeah. That's when all that's there. So that was just an excuse to show off my Scottish accent.
Of course it was. The Scottish guy who is Sergeant Linus Mosk.
Yeah, Linus Mosk at your service, sir.
He was great.
He was great. He was a lot. He was perfect.
They really put out the casting call for all their British actors in this.
They did, and Scots too. Even Tim is a Scot.
Tim?
Yeah. But yes, that is the initial really big betrayal. Turns him in as a Canary. Like, they know they're looking for a Canary male. He's the one who gives them all that information because Bix knows.
Mm-hmm.
The prison stuff is probably...
I think that's the high watermark for the season.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say.
And not just... I mean, there's great acting, I think. Andy Serkis did such a good job with that character. But additionally, what really stood out to me from that section is we have talked about how a lot of the content that is coming out these days is kind of... it feels rushed. It feels like they're trying to pack too much in, or plot wise, just trying to keep things moving, and so it loses out on the characterization. Well, they spend one entire episode just establishing the routine of being in this prison, and just the disorientation that Cassian feels trying to figure it all out at once, and eventually realizing, kind of losing hope over the course of this one episode, realizing just how just hopeless it feels to try to get out of this place, and how crushing the architecture of the prison is, and the environment, and the laser floor that, if you're on it too long, it'll vaporize you, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels oppressive and claustrophobic in the architecture, in the cinematography. Yeah.
In the worst way.
It to me, it showed a level of filmmaking that was just really interesting, and emphasized the way they're trying to get the audience to feel is how Cassian feels walking through this place.
Absolutely. I mean, settings matter in this show, and not just for being a reflection of character and story, like you just said, but they matter. They matter. I mean, it only just occurred to me, again, as I was watching The Mandalorian, because then I started rewatching the season just to get reacquainted with the earliest episodes and how the story evolves. I remember the ending better than I do the beginning. But when I was watching Andor, they're very, very deliberate. I think this carries over from Rogue One, to be fair, but they're very, very deliberate about saying where you are. And at a given time, when you end up on a new planet, they're like, this is what is happening, and this is where you are. In The Mandalorian, I mean, I know it's fairly obvious. They go to Navarro about 800,000 times, but they don't ever... if you're just kind of watching it while you're doing the dishes or something, it's easy to miss. And they don't always make that clear. Like, it just doesn't seem to matter. Like, the settings here matter in terms of the events of the story, in terms of characterization, like you said, in terms of set dressing and just creating an atmosphere. You can really tell that The Mandalorian is shot on one of those giant LED screens. Mm-hmm. It's just... It doesn't feel like a green screen. It feels more immersive than that, but it's just a backdrop. The setting, the location is nothing more than a backdrop. It carries no story weight with it. It's not a character in the story in the way that a lot of these locations are, particularly the prison, mostly.
The set in Andor, the different sets, it's almost a character in its own right. I mean,
particularly the prison.
I find that, for sure.
I find that a tough argument to make with other settings, maybe. Like Aldhani is Aldhani.
Whatever. Well, yeah, if we're going to give credit to the prison, I think Aldhani for me was the low watermark. It didn't work for me nearly as well. I thought the acting was weaker.
Yeah, there's 2 episodes, like episode like 4 or 5, somewhere in there. I was kind of like, I was starting to maybe get a little drowsy. I the show really picks up on after that. But if the show has a dip, it's definitely right around there.
It was a little more ham-handed. They were doing more telling than showing. I thought the one rebel kid who was like a poet. Yeah. I thought that was very heavy-handed.
Yeah, all his lines are like, "Oh, hope and
aspirational," and it was like reading one of those. What do they call those motivational posters?
He was literally writing a manifesto. To be fair,
it was just.
But even that's a little on the nose.
It's on the nose, exactly. Yeah. Who else stood out to you in this? I thought the leader of the ISB did a great job. Very nuanced performance, I thought, but fascinating. I mean, I was enraptured. Every one of those scenes between these conniving officers of the Imperial Security Bureau, it felt very tense. You could feel the tension, like you could cut it with a knife.
Yeah, and also that actor gave you a sense that he had a sharpness to him, that he could cut through all the bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, he could see what his officers were doing. He could see the wheels turning. He could see more than just what was being presented to him. You could tell that he could read between the lines, because at first he is relatively dismissive of the woman ISB agent, but slowly he picks up on something, and he's like, you know, if he was just an arrogant knucklehead, even if he was really smart, if he's really arrogant, he might just miss it entirely. He has his eyes open, and I think through his performance, he demonstrates a sharpness.
Some good leadership. I mean, he's rewarding, people who go above and beyond. It was I mean, you hate to say it about the Imperials, but he seemed like a pretty darn good leader.
Well, it's like, again, the Nazis. I mean, they weren't unsuccessful. You can say what you want about the Nazis. I mean, they're horrible, but
organized.
Yeah, they sure were. They were dialed in. So, yeah, it's very much a reflection of that. And especially in a world where democracy does feel like it's fighting off fascism increasingly, I think this show was deliberately really exploring that. And not always in this sometimes when you see something that's exploring fascism, it's just gearing up to tear it down at any, they only explore it enough to just be like, oh, this is just such a monstrous, horrible system, and look how terrible. And this show clearly shows you how terrible, but through more subtlety and just by showing you the mechanisms and the human beings behind this stuff, it doesn't necessarily make it any more acceptable or many more relatable. It's still scary, horrible, oppressive fascism. But it's just interesting to see the machine, look inside the machine rather than just go, ew, this machine is horrible. Yeah. Most media just doesn't explore it past that. They don't even bother to take a peek inside, because here in capitalist societies, we just keep it at arm's length.
Yeah, I think you use the words machine and mechanisms, and the word that I had was mechanics. And so I think it's interesting that both of us were kind of clued into that. It is about the operation of fascism, right? It's not just a political philosophy. There are people who actually enact these decisions on a daily basis in ways small and large, and
that relish in it. They have to keep that moving. They don't just do it because someone's holding a gun to their head. That only goes so far. You can't push people. You can only push people so far that way. Syril Karn doesn't need a gun to his head.
Bingo. Exactly. That's what this is about. For every Emperor Palpatine, there are a million Syril Karns.
He's motivated by a disapproving mother.
Yes, exactly. And I thought that was a really interesting way to add depth to that character and to show where some of this comes from.
Totally.
This hole in him for approval, that he is desperate to show his value and his worth and how he fits in And
just for someone to say you did a great job,
the validation,
you did
exactly.
It was all you. You
that
nailed
was
it.
So well characterized. I think that love that about this show.
Definitely.
Anybody else stand out to you?
I mean, we've talked about Stellan Skarsgård a little bit, and I just want to give another shout out to him. I do think he is one of the stronger parts of the show, and I think the way that he puts on his mask of being the art dealer as opposed to the rebel.
So he has this antiquities shop on Coruscant that is a front for his rebel activities.
Yeah. And it's not like he suddenly embodies, he doesn't Daniel Day-Lewis it and like become this whole other character when he's being that art dealer, but there's particularly a moment when you kind of when you first see this, because you meet him as this rebel, and then you see the scene where he goes and like after he leaves Cassian, he goes and he puts on this wig and this clothing, and you're like, what's he doing? And then he kind of looks at himself in the mirror and holds his hand up, and he strikes this pose that could, done by a lesser actor, could feel really corny and really odd looking. But for me, I felt like you were witnessing his transformation. And it is sort of like a meta thing because he's an actor who is now playing a guy who's acting. But it looked like a guy who wasn't like a professional actor, just someone who was trying to get away with a con, trying to really make this convincing for out of fear and desperation and need. It's not like he's putting on a show because he gets paid to go on Broadway to do it. He's there's no, I guess what I sensed this emptiness too when he struck that pose. He didn't relish in it. He didn't relish in being this character. He doesn't enjoy his life. Yeah. This is all necessity, and he's a slave to his rebellion. Everything he does is for this rebellion, and there's like no him left. He's always wearing a mask. He's wearing a mask when he's a rebel. He's wearing a mask when he's this guy, and he just struck this pose, and he looks so dead inside in a way. Yeah. I just think he's always a great actor, and he could have done maybe more in other parts in the show, but what he did with that really, really worked for me.
Well, in those scenes and those of his interactions with some of the other spies, give
his
enough,
assistant,
with Mon Mothma, with Cassian. Those do the building of his character so that when he delivers that speech near the end of the season, that has some real gravity and weight, and you feel what he has sacrificed, what he has actually given up to stand for something. This rebellion has essentially taken over his entire life. He has no life beyond this rebellion. And so in that moment when he's delivering that speech, it carries that additional weight because you have seen all along the way of the season how little else there is for him.
Well, there's actually a theme. All of the rebels have no lives, nothing left, nothing to lose.
Right.
Mon Mothma has a little bit to lose
because she has a daughter,
but she basically loses it.
Yeah.
You know, she gets to go back to her kind of plush life for most of the season, but that all starts to crumble at the end of the season, and that life does kind of slip away from her. Basically, every rebel who's successful, everyone at the top of that rebellion has to give up everything. Every single one of them. You watch it systematically. I mean, it's Cassian's doing the same thing. It's not like he has a lot, but he's giving himself over to it. Mm-hmm. They all are. They all don't live their lives for them. None of them. Or even for the people they love and care about. It's for this thing, this amorphous.
Well, and it's because from the moment you become a rebel, everything you love can then be used against you, right?
Like the classic hero.
You have to kind of numb yourself to the implications of that decision.
Yeah. And like you touched on way back, there's sometimes not a lot that separates the rebels from the
Imperials.
I'm trying to think, what is his name? Lucian? What the hell is his name? Stellan Skarsgård? I just can't remember. Luthen. The Lutheran, he's a Christian. Luthen particularly when he goes and sees Saw Gerrera, and they have that whole debate
the
about
Forrest Whitaker character,
letting that guy die, basically, that spy that they have. Yep. That's one of those moments where where he demonstrates like the sacrifices that he's made, that, you know, the decisions that he's had to make. He really plays as dirty as it gets. He isn't really any better than he knows that. In that speech, he says something like, you know, I have to use the tools of my enemy. And
battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster.
Yeah, but there is no other way to win.
Right.
There is no other way. Mm-hmm. There isn't. Like, it would not be a successful rebellion. Countries don't get toppled. You know, oppressive dictatorships do not get toppled by playing nice.
Yeah.
They just don't. You have to be as dirty or dirtier in some ways. Yeah. It's like the harsh truth about it. Because what you just said is true, that the hero, the person who's leading these rebellions, they have to give up everything, and the people close to them. And there's all those tropes about heroes that we know very, very well. But it's underexplored how much real life heroes, not people with superpowers and stuff, real people that have to make change and for the better, have to really, really get their hands dirty.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are not well enough equipped to be handling, you know, this real of a conversation on this podcast. But I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you could talk about real life examples, you know, in contrast between people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, for instance, right? I mean, there is this nonviolent approach, but for every one of those, there are also a more direct approach. And I mean, John Brown would be another example, who's an abolitionist leader who stormed Harper's Ferry and became kind of a martyr of the Civil War. A lot of people don't think that that it would have gone as it did if he hadn't stormed Harper's Ferry and tried to free a bunch of slaves, because then the South felt like there was that the Northerners weren't just going to roll over, that they actually had some guns and they were serious about, you know, taking on the slavery issue. So, I mean, I do think that there is that subtext to this show. It maybe doesn't explore it in quite such a way, but
I don't know if it explores the flip side. I think this show kind of makes the case that the Malcolm X's are right.
You gotta get your hands dirty. Somebody has to get their hands dirty. It's a privilege to be able to just play by the rules, because that's not how fascism works.
Right. And even those leaders that use sort of different tactics and peace and things like that to still lead a successful rebellion, for lack of a better word, Gandhi, you know, they were still successful, but in some ways you're not really fighting purely with love, like Everything Ever All at Once style. You're in some ways outsmarting your opponent as well.
Yeah.
You're just speaking to something higher that motivates people in a different way. You know, I think sometimes when you're fighting like fascism, I don't think playing nice really does get you anywhere. You have to outsmart with basically like offer a better alternative, a better product, or fight on their terms. Those are kind of your only options.
Or, I mean, I would say maybe even both. Like, you need to have leaders you need to have multiple avenues that you're exploring at the same time. You got to be fighting on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're talking about this in an exploration of a Star Wars show is exactly why I liked this show much more than any other Star Wars show.
I know.
Or content.
Well, and it's the reason that I do too.
Yeah.
I just wish that... I think The Last Jedi gets a lot right in terms of being well-written, subverting expectations, doing some stuff with character, delivering fan service. The Last Jedi gets a lot right. Mandalorian isn't polished enough. It's not mature enough. It's not for adults enough. And Andor is very much for adults, and it's very polished and really well done. And we haven't said this yet, but I think we both agree it's at its... I mean, I don't even want to say it at its best, because especially if you take Game of Thrones as a whole, if you include the ending and everything, this is on that same level, definitely.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same following as a Game of Thrones, but as someone who just didn't care about Game of Thrones, I feel like I'm fairly objective in saying this is as well made. Sets, characters, acting, writing. Not every actor in Game of Thrones is perfect. It's close. It's close. You could probably argue a difference.
It's in the same ballpark. I think the challenge for me is that Game of Thrones was 8 seasons, and so there was a lot more highs and lows.
And we're only going to get one more of this season.
Right.
So that's a tough comparison. But if you just take like a season, like season 1 of Game of Thrones,
I think that's fair.
I think there's a lot. I think they're pretty neck and neck. Where was I going with that? In a perfect world, there would be something. And so anyway, the show was great, but it, in some ways, for Star Wars fans, I don't want to say lacks because it doesn't need it. It's doing a whole other thing. But if there was something that could be this sophisticated and also explore mythology in Star Wars and throw in a couple cool things like
lore.
that. Yeah. If you could be exploring, because even you yourself get interested when you're talking about Mandalorian lore and Bo-Katan and why does she have a right to this throne, and if you could do all that and turn that into Game of Thrones and make it real political backstabbing and intrigue and this epic history, maybe that's a bad example, maybe not The Mandalorian or that story, but if you could make Star Wars characters feel this rich and real, and every now and then stick a lightsaber in their hand, I wouldn't be complaining. Let's put it that way.
I think that's fair. I am sure that this show lost some audiences for whom it was too serious, and there wasn't enough lightsabers or Jedis or Sith or any. I mean, I think it's notable that this show does not have any Skywalkers, any Jedi, any Sith. That is a huge deal for a Star Wars product.
Yeah, but neither does Rogue One, and it didn't hurt its popularity.
Sure. And for me...
So there is a market.
For me, I loved that about it, just because it was a breath of fresh air. Not to say that I don't enjoy some of the cool action scenes and the Jedi and Sith, that whole thing, but I have seen enough of the Skywalker family for a lifetime in the 9 movies they've come out with.
I think we all have, particularly the last 3. They shouldn't have gone in that direction.
Yeah. You can only mine that nostalgia for so long before you start to lose me. So
the next Star Wars movie is going to be Rey, set 15 years later. More of her. Can you believe that?
I mean, that's fine, I guess.
No, it's not. It's pretty lame. It's a
I'm
bad
okay
choice.
with that as long as they don't bring Mark Hamill back as a
They
fucking
won't. He's
grandpa.
dead now, but he might be a ghost.
Great.
Oh, I'm a ghost now.
Spooky ghost.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, I knocked over your glass. One thing I think you should see is the Han Solo story.
Yeah,
movie.
I need to see that.
It's not Rogue One, so I'm not going to even sit here and pretend to you that it's that, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's kind of weird that it's a different actor that isn't Han Solo, or sorry, not Harrison Ford. So it's weird, but it's pretty well done. It's a Ron Howard movie. It's fun. I think if you take it for what it is, it's pretty decent, and it is nice that it's kind of this self-contained story. And you've got fighting, blasters and Chewbacca and everything, but no lightsabers, not a lot of Sith stuff. You get like a Darth Maul cameo, but there's a tiny little bit of fan service. It's pretty good. I'd be curious.
It sounds
what
like
you
it's
think.
a little more self-contained, which I think is good. It's a little more street level, for lack of a better term.
It is, and it plays it safe. But I think you'd be like, oh, that was worth a watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in a lot of cases, Star Wars just does better when they're not trying to make this big thing. The big problem with the recent Skywalker movies is that they were made by 3 different directors. They didn't really have a vision. They just kept adding a director on, being like, oh yeah, can you make sense of this mess?
Well, and just undoing what the previous director had done.
Yeah, but you need to have a
vision.
A vision for your trilogy,
Yeah.
or just do one self-contained movie. Because
Yeah.
if you look at the Last Jedi as a self-contained movie, I think it's really pretty freaking good. But especially when you take it in context of the trilogy,
Bookend
it's
it.
a mess. It's just a mess. But
Any other final thoughts on this before we go on to our kind of MVP, LVPs?
no, it's time for that.
All right. Well, who's your MVP?
I want to say probably Syril Karn. In a lot of ways, I just enjoyed him the most. I liked that actor a lot. I thought he brought tons of subtlety and depth, and listening to when he's like listening to his mother talk, and the way he twitches in his little suit and adjusts himself when the guy is, asking if he got his suit tailored, and he just looks like he's puckering his butthole all the time. He does a great job, and the reason he's the MVP too is because even when he sort of loses in his fight to capture Cassian, he still goes and gets in that little, he's like in office space. He's in a little cubicle.
Oh yeah.
Doing that, whatever he's doing, but he's still helping the ISB officers. He's still supporting them. I mean, he
stalking the ISB officers.
Well, yeah. But I mean, his obsession is so great. I mean, he is so driven. I admire that character, how driven he is, and he just never gives up. And the ISB wouldn't probably be successful without him. So as much as that blonde girl is really smart and puts it all together, his continued efforts from the beginning to the end of the show amount to a lot. So,
yeah, I think that that detail that they put in like one of the first episodes, maybe the first episode, yeah, about how he's getting his Imperial suit tailored, is I think such a great little piece that they added to that.
It says everything you need to know.
Right. That even though he is the ultimate sycophant for the Empire and this cog in the machine, like a cog who loves being a cog.
He takes personal ownership over it.
Right. But even he has this little flare of individualism that even fascism can't snuff out.
I guess that's one way to look. Yeah, I guess I took it more as like
that he takes such pride in being an agent of the Empire that he wants to look, like a tailored suit.
No, yeah, that like in his mind, they haven't gone far enough. Like their uniforms are consistent and uniform, of course. They all look the same. But if you really want to do it right, like Nazi uniforms were tailored, there's a sleekness to them. And I think that lends itself to, again, a well-oiled machine, and I think he's just so obsessed and he loves fascism so much. He's so in the details that in his mind, a detail like that matters. If all your army are marching around in a tailored outfit that just looks that much more put together, it's somehow more menacing in a way. I guess I took it that way, but your point is really good too.
Well, and I think they can both be true. I mean, he ultimately he sees himself in the Empire. Like that is he resonates with his place and his role within this much larger system.
Yeah.
And so I think the choice to have him do that right off the bat in the first episode was a good one. My MVP, it's tough, and it's between Dedra Meero, who I really did enjoy as the ISB officer, or the Mon Mothma. I mean, I thought she was fantastic as well.
Not as much screen time maybe for Mon Mothma, right? Maybe more towards the end.
More at the end. They spend quite a bit with her and her family and Perrin. I think they did a great job of making her husband such a detestable POS.
He actually, as an actor, he does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Just the way he moves is so like...
And his kimono and...
yeah, and his little man bun. He just looks... he's so arrogant.
But I think I got to give it to Dedra Meero. She does such a good job of getting you to root for her. I mean, I can't put it in any other way. Even though she's an agent of the Empire and I am totally at odds with everything she's trying to accomplish, just her facial expressions. There's one moment when she has a win in one of these, high attention political conversations with her bosses and her peers and all that. And she comes out of it with a win, and she does like a fist pump coming out of it. And you can just feel just the pride and the ambition,
the built up energy.
Right,
of
exactly.
It,
I think she did a great job with this role.
And since I just watched it and there's scenes that are fresh in my memory, another thing that she added to that, I just watched a scene where she basically first kind of calls out to the boss, like, I think something weird's going on with this stuff. And it is initially kind of dismissed. And then she goes and talks to, I think, an underling basically of hers. And she's saying to him, she's like, this is a hunch I have, but, maybe he's probably right. It probably is just nothing. And the underling's like, no, I really believe in you. I really trust you. And I think you should follow that instinct. Like, let's figure this out. Let's get to the bottom of this. Like, trust yourself, which for one thing is just a cool interaction to watch with those kinds of people. They're human beings can still be good to each other, even within a system like that, like really genuinely supportive, even when you have ugly goals. But her self-doubt in that moment is very relatable. It's not like she is so gung-ho and so motivated that
she has imposter syndrome, essentially.
Yeah, she's not blinded by her ambition. She pauses to think, oh, well, yeah, maybe she does have some imposter syndrome, but it gives her character so much more depth and roundedness.
Yeah. What about the LVP who maybe didn't bring their best work to this?
Bix.
Yeah, Bix Colleen was cringeworthy.
Yeah, I mean...
Adria Arjona.
Yeah. I saw her in Morbius, too.
I didn't see Morbius, but I did see her in Good Omens.
Oh, is she good in that?
She's...
the same.
She's tolerable in Good Omens.
She's never intolerable for me. But...
it was pretty close in this.
No, I think that's harsh. I just think she suffers from the classic, like, Hollywood. I mean, and I hate to say this even out loud, but it's kind of like, and it's not classic to just women, for the record. This applies to men, but sometimes you just get a good-looking person and you stick them in Hollywood. And
get a few more opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, Liam Hemsworth, he's not very talented. I mean, I'll give Chris Hemsworth some props. He's not an amazing actor, but he has some talent.
Yeah.
His brother is not all that good and is just a good-looking guy that gets cast in stuff for that. So there's a male example.
Yeah.
But she, unfortunately is more kind of just attractive and not as talented. It just feels like, especially in this show, you've got people acting at like Game of Thrones level and she's acting at like Mandalorian level.
That's the problem when you have, when you're in a project like this where you have a lot of good actors around you, it stands out more when you're not able to keep up. And I mean, come on, they got Stellan Skarsgård in this and like some excellent actors around them, so can only give them so much flack. But for me, it was Vel, Mon Mothma's cousin, who leads this rebel unit on Aldhani. Yikes. I thought it was just very ham-handed.
I think she's worse than Arjona.
It was not good. I thought it was very... it took me out of it. It
was very wooden.
Wooden, just ham-handed. Just
that could be writing,
not
too,
subtle.
But yeah.
Yeah. We talked about the high watermark. We both like the prison scenes, probably the best.
Oh, I mean, Kino Loy is actually the MVP. What are we talking about?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Duh.
Andy Serkis is amazing.
Again, one of the only characters' names who I remember because he's so
Kino
memorable.
Loy.
And it's a good name, too.
It's all right.
Oh, shut up. If only you knew behind the scenes, folks. The other things we talk about.
Yeah, I've been talking trash about these Star Wars names.
Yeah, oh God, like we can't even rehash that. Oh, my computer's gonna die.
Well, you got anything else, man?
No, I think we
covered it all.
Yeah, we mined this for all it's worth. We mined this toxic Imperial planet.
Yeah, we'll be back to cover probably season 2 whenever that comes out.
Yeah, it will be coming, and it will be the final season. It's going to bridge the gap. Apparently, it's going to take you right to the beginning of Rogue One. So
I kind of like that, too. I like that they're not just keeping going with Andor as long as they can get people to tune in and just going past its prime. So many shows do that. I just get out while it's still good.
Well, and they don't I don't think shows set out to do that, but they execute a couple seasons and then they don't have a direction. They just want the views and the money. And then that's where Mandalorian's at for sure. They've kind of run out of a direction. And so they're just kind of like, look, filler. You love these guys, don't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. To pre-plan that out and just be like, this is where we're going to end. This is the full arc. Here's what we can dedicate to the first season. Here's what we can put to the second. Boom. It's a much better way to do it. And even, Marvel, and their 6-episode shows. If you're just doing one episode or one season, 6 episodes, you think you could just get that right. But give it 2 more episodes, guys. It might help you. But
yeah.
Anyway.
All right.
Our gripes are well established.
Exactly. Yeah, we're starting to become
Get off my lawn.
Right. Old man yells at Cloud.
Yeah, we should be reviewing Renfield next week if we get to seeing it, which we should.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
All right. See you then, folks.
See you on the flip side.